This is the Poolies podcast with Matt Larkin and Stephen Ellis.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Poolies podcast. It's Matt Larkin, as always, with Stephen Ellis, and this is a special episode. We are talking pure NHL Draft lottery. The Connor Bedard pick was awarded last night, and we need to discuss the fantasy fallout. Stephen, scale of 1 to 10, how excited were you with the result on Monday?
You know what? It feels like I've been following this draft for 5 years. I'm just happy that we're kind of closer to knowing who's going where at this point. So I'll take a 10, just 4 or 5, whatever. I'm kind of ready for this draft to hurry up.
Yeah, I understand. I think it's a 0 in the sense that nobody really wanted him to go to the Chicago Blackhawks, the team that deserved him the least karmically. But I know, of course, for the NHL itself, it's probably a win. It's a big market. We're going to get to see a lot more Connor Bedard nationally. So that is sort of the glass half full. So I want to just jump right in, Stephen, and let's discuss the fantasy fallout. We're going to look at the top 5 teams now. We know the draft order, at least the top of it for the teams that are out of the playoffs. So let's go through those first 5 teams. I know you have your mock draft on dailyfaceoff.com right now. And let's discuss what the fantasy implications are going to be. So we're going to start, of course, with the Chicago Blackhawks landing Connor Bedard. What do you think is the ripple effect from a fantasy perspective for the Blackhawks now?
Well, it can't be worse than it was this season. Obviously, this team was not very good this year, and they look like they could have got that number 1 pick up until the final few days of the regular season. I think you can only go up from here at this point. It should be very easy to attract some quality players, I think, this summer. They'll have the cap space to do it. They were planning for a big prospect like this when they started to really sell off a year ago. One guy I'd keep an eye on is Seth Jones. As you know, he lost the 2 guys he was passing to, and in Taze and Kane, mostly Kane, obviously. But now he's got a guy where he'll be setting up Bedard in all situations. I think that would be one where that would be kind of interesting. But, looking at the roster right now, there's obviously not a lot great going for it, but I do think, they got a really good prospect pool. A lot of that won't be ready right away, but I do think that in time, they're going to get the pieces they need. And, from a long-term perspective, this could be a group that becomes a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's funny. I was going through who I thought would benefit, and I overlooked Seth Jones. It shows how forgotten he's become in those first couple of years of the Blackhawks. I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right. Totally. Seth Jones gains a lot. I think the name that I'm watching the closest absolutely is Lucas Reichel. Obviously, they slow played him a little bit in the AHL. He had nothing left to prove, and he had his moments late this season, I think, and I definitely expect him to be a full-time NHLer next year. So to me, there's just on paper right now, not a ton of competition for him to end up high in the lineup. And I know he's been known to play more than one forward position, but I think it's a situation where the Blackhawks, they could shoehorn him into a line and make it work with him and Connor Bedard if need be. And I think you're right about the free agency situation. The Blackhawks have, I think, more than $40 million in cap space. So who knows who they might be adding to the fray. And obviously having Bedard is a massive selling point, especially not just if you want to go to a winner, but if you're looking for a 1-year deal and the chance to play with Bedard, puff up your stats, that's another way to lure a free agent. And of course, I'm wondering if Patrick Kane might be going back to Chicago now to sort of be the former first overall pick mentor, sort of the insulation for Bedard, even from a media standpoint. So we'll see about that. I'm wondering if he could sort of revive his career from a fantasy perspective as well. And also from a prospect perspective, a guy I'm really looking at closely is Kevin Korchinski. So we don't know if he's going to be an NHLer this year, but his potential, as Ryan Kennedy said on our previous episode, very high. And if you just look at the possible power play scenarios down the road, Korchinski's going to be the guy quarterbacking it, and I think he could have some monster fantasy numbers in a few years. So, Stephen, let's talk now about the Anaheim Ducks. So they're the quote-unquote loser. They had the best odds in the draft lottery, 25.5%, but they're still getting a really good player. It's likely going to be Adam Fantilli. What are the fantasy implications there?
Well, first off, this is very fitting because this is exactly what happened in the Sidney Crosby draft. But I really had some just great thoughts about how fun it would be to see a power play with McTavish and Bedard and Zegras and Zellweger, and you could even throw Drysdale. You could put literally 2 defensemen on there, but because Zellweger acts as a 4 forward, that would have been great. But it won't be. they'll be getting likely Adam Fantilli, a guy who was asleep during the draft lottery. Having talked to him yesterday, and he was excited no matter where he was going to go, but you know, I think the big question of whether at this point is whether or not he'll go to the NHL next year or not. I talked to him. He said he hasn't decided. I kind of got the sense, though, it's kind of like, we'll wait till the NHL team tells me what's going to happen. And I think in this case of Anaheim, he could step in immediately. And they got a really good young core, and I've written about them before for Daily Faceoff. I think that they got a good group going on, and a couple guys that I'm looking at potentially benefiting from. Let's say he does play next year. Frank Vetrano, a guy who had 41 points this past year. I think very underrated. But now he played well with Strome. But if you have a chance to play with Fantilli, I think that unlocks a few extra steps there. There's a lot more excitement and a lot less to lose. I think that's a pretty exciting position to be in. And then also another guy's one of the guys that got in the John Klingberg trade, which was Nikita Nestorenko, who I think is actually a guy that's going to be very underrated. Maybe could hit 35 points this coming season as a rookie, which wouldn't be bad for a guy who was kind of underrated. And you give him someone to play with because at the end of that season he was playing with Isaac Lundstrom on the third line. But if your third liner becomes Ryan Strome, or if it is Fantilli, I think that definitely gives them a bit more push there. And I do think it will also help a guy like Jamie Drysdale having another guy to pass to. I do expect Fantilli to play power play, whether that's first or second. I'm not totally sure, but he can kind of do a lot. He played a lot of different roles this year with Michigan. We saw that with the Chicago Steel. We've just kind of seen it throughout that he's so versatile, and that's what makes him such a good prospect, a guy who would be number one in most other drafts. So I think, there's a lot of guys in that situation that will really thrive, but those are the ones I'm kind of keying in there.
Yeah, I think those names are definitely ones to watch. The guy that I'm most curious about in terms of the ripple effect is actually Trevor Zegras, which might sound strange because we think, well, Trevor Zegras is the center, Adam Fantilli is the center, Mason McTavish is the center. But to me, that might be a good problem to have because I wonder if Trevor Zegras' skill set long term might be better served on the left wing. He's not really a powerful guy. He's not really known for his defensive acumen. And I could see a future where Trevor Zegras plays more of a Johnny Gaudreau type of left wing, where we've proven in the modern version of the NHL, the way the game goes east-west, Mitch Marner as well, you can be the primary puck carrier and make things happen on the wing. And I wonder if there's a way to create a loaded line down the road where you have Trevor Zegras playing with Adam Fantilli, just because of the fact that, so far we know Zegras has tremendous offensive skill, but he hasn't really rounded out the defensive side of his game yet. So I don't know. I think that could be an interesting scenario. I'm not saying I've heard anything that's a plan, but it's just something I envision that could make sense down the road. And obviously that would be a boon to Trevor Zegras' value if he can be out there at the same time as Adam Fantilli. So next up, Stephen, we'll talk about the team that I guess we have to call the biggest loser of draft lottery night, the Columbus Blue Jackets, because they had, I believe it was the second best odds, and they miss on both lottery spots. They fall down to the number 3 spot, which of course it's still going to get them a great player in this draft class, but maybe not necessarily a player going right to the NHL. So what do you think about the implications for Columbus?
This one's interesting because when I was looking at what to place Matvei Michkov in mind, I was like, could Columbus do it? But they made it clear they're looking for a centerman, and they got a really good opportunity here to get a guy like Leo Carlsson or Will Smith. I'm leaning towards Leo Carlsson. I think he's more. You don't pick a guy who's more NHL ready at this point because that could be, you're thinking short term there more than long term. But with Leo Carlsson, I just think that he's going to be a number one center, and he'll be the number one center that Johnny Gaudreau really needs. Now, again, I'm now almost more kind of thinking like Will Smith's kind of got that skill to really play with a guy like Gaudreau. But I think, with Carlsson, he could be that net front presence. He's got the two-way game. He could be physical. He could do all that. And that's a nice little addition for a guy like Gaudreau who, in his first season in Columbus, we expect big things from Gaudreau. I thought he had still a good season, all things considered. But, when he's playing with guys like Boone Jenner and Sean Kuraly as your number one centerman, it's not exactly, Leo Carlsson is not exactly a number one guy that you really believe in. So I think that should really help. And that would also be good for a guy like Kirill Marchenko, who's a really good goal scorer. And we're expecting to see him continue to rise up the ranks the next couple of years. But might not be the most defensively sound player. Leo Carlsson can handle that a bit better. And I think that takes a bit of responsibility away from Marchenko and just says, just go score. Just go do what you do best. And that's really good there too. So, I think those are the ones that could really benefit from playing a guy like him. But, I think Carlson's ready. I don't know if he's going to be playing a full-time role in the NHL, and it might be something where they ease him in. I think the Blue Jackets can be very patient there, but if they end up picking him, I think he should be at training camp. He should be contending to make the top line right out of the bat there. So I do like Columbus's future. They got some good young guys coming up. I think this is going to be a good future. It's just, there's still some work to be done. They did come second last in the NHL this year.
Yeah, that's right. And it's interesting because I do envision them taking Leo Carlsson as well. And from a real life standpoint, I think it's a great fit. And I know there's been Andrei Kopitar comparisons for Leo Carlsson. And if you think about the idea of the perfect line archetype, it goes right back to like playing NHL 2003 and you're putting grinder, scorer, playmaker. It's like you need every great line has the passer, the digger, and the shooter. So if you have the passer in Johnny Gaudreau, you have the shooter in Patrick Laine. Theoretically, a digger, Leo Carlsson, could make the perfect line. Like that could be an absolutely dominant line in the NHL. The only thing I wonder for fantasy purposes, as you implied as well, we don't know 100% that Leo Carlsson is playing 82 games in the NHL next season. So there may be a learning curve. There may be a wait because, of course, he's coming from Europe. He could play in the AHL for a little bit too. So it's just a matter of wait and see. But if it seems like he's going to make the team out of training camp, then giddy up. It actually could be a very fantasy-friendly situation right off the bat for Leo Carlsson and the Blue Jackets. So next up, we have the San Jose Sharks, a team that's just in flux because they still have some of their veterans like Erik Karlsson, Logan Couture hanging around. They have Thomas Hertl signed long-term, but the team is sort of in transition. So it's more of an awkward situation to figure out for fantasy. What do you envision right now for the Sharks?
This one's tough because I do kind of think that, if they're going to pick the best player available, and let's say that is Will Smith at that point, you're going to be waiting at least 1 year there for him. And he's going to be going to college. He'll be playing with the entire same line he had this year at the U.S. National Development Team. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But, this is not going to be a super quick transition. So when you're looking at it, the Sharks are still trying to build towards the future. They got one of the worst prospect pools in the league, so they really need to hit on this one, which is also part of the reason why I don't think they would go for a guy like Michkov, which, he's a top 4 quality prospect, but San Jose needs to start building towards something, and that's picking a guy who can't come over till 2026. I don't see it happening. But a guy that I think would really benefit there is William Eklund. He's if he becomes a full-time NHLer this year, he probably won't have a lot of great quality players to play with, but that'll change in a year or two if they pick a guy like Smith, who could be that creative, high IQ play driver that Eklund needs to play alongside. And so I am thinking a little more long term here, because we still got to see where they take this thing through. I think if I gave them the lowest rating, I believe, of all the teams in my pre-draft lottery prospect pool ratings, just because I just don't love what they got there. I don't think they got a lot of guys that are going to be a huge difference maker, but I think that he could really start to push things forward there. Will Smith and a guy like William Eklund could really benefit from that, as having someone to play with, essentially.
Yeah, and I had Will Smith earmarked for San Jose as well, of course. But I agree with you. It seems like more of a long-term situation. And the Sharks might not even be a team that wants to start improving immediately this year. Maybe they could use one more year where they're bad, and they could add another big piece to the pool. And plus, they have to figure out just, are they trading Erik Karlsson? Are they bringing in more futures? So it also means there might be less pressure on whoever they pick it for to come right in. But I also agree at the same time, it's not like you necessarily want to wait several years, but I could see, let's say, Will Smith, maybe one more year of seasoning. We'll see what happens. And last, Stephen, I want to talk about the Montreal Canadiens, who are now looking like they will be picking, I think, still a very good player at number 5, but there's a little bit of a drop-off, it seems.
It depends on how you look at it. Like, I picked Ryan Leonard to go there, and talking to a lot of scouts, I polled which I can't fully agree with, but I polled about 10 scouts. Like, would you rather have Leonard long term or Smith? And it was actually 6-4 in terms of people picking Leonard. They just think the way that he can really take over a play. He's very smart, as is Will Smith. He's got that frame that allows him to throw some hits. He's willing to do that. But they just say he looks more like a pro-ready player. He's been training with pros his whole life. His brother is in the National Predators organization. So, there's a lot to like there. I think Ryan Leonard's going to be a really good prospect if he ends up going to Montreal. It could be Dalibor Dvorsky. It could be a lot of things. I've heard some people think Dvorsky should go top 5. I still don't agree. And a lot of scouts I talk to disagree heavily there. But I think, there's a lot of talent you can go there. While there is a drop off, I don't know if it's a huge drop off from like 4 to like 9, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
For the Canadiens, though, they just need to keep adding assets. I think this year, while they've added some nice young defensemen, I think that's a good sign. It's now like, what can you do forward and what can you do in net? And I think for forwards, you want to get some guys that can help out a guy like Slafkovsky, give him something more quality to play with. It was nice seeing him playing with some veterans this year, but I think the kind of fun thing with Cole Caulfield was he got to play from an early age with Suzuki, and they got to really just kind of to meld together. And I don't think Slafkovsky got that. He was playing with guys like, do you know if those players will be in the lineup next week or next season type thing? So it'd be kind of cool to get a guy that could be there a bit more long term with him and give him some opportunities. But I think with the Canadiens, it's kind of like you're still trying to shape what this roster is going to look like. You've got a lot of good prospects coming up. I think of the teams in the top 5, this one might be with San Jose might be one of the harder ones to kind of say where this is going to go. But I do like what Montreal is going to be building towards. It helps that they have like 300 draft picks over a couple year span. But right now I'm looking at, you want to get help for a guy like Slafkovsky.
Yeah, I agree that they're a tough team to figure out. I even was wondering, would they ever spring for a Zach Benson? And I know they already have a lot of small forwards, and obviously now that they traded for Kirby Dach, they're sort of too strong up the middle with Nick Suzuki and Kirby Dach. But if we're just looking for ceiling, for upside, I still think the Habs could use a little bit more. Because even Slafkovsky, he's a very physical player. But I don't think he necessarily has absolute superstar upside. Whereas I think Benson, with the offensive game he has, it'd be interesting. Then again, I don't know. Maybe it would mean too many small guys in the system. You factor in Caulfield and, of course, Lane Hudson as well. So the Habs, to me, out of the top 5, are the team that I have the hardest time projecting what they're going to do. So it'll be interesting to see. And that's just the top 5, but I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about Bedard and the fantasy fallout, especially as Chicago starts adding pieces as we get to free agency. It's going to be very interesting next season, and we'll see how high Bedard gets picked. It's going to depend on what his supporting cast is, I'm sure.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward. If you're a Canadiens fan, they seem to be the ones that are the most like I don't want to say hypersensitive to everything on the draft, but it's like you guys. I've been following it all year long. You guys expected it to be a really rough year, and I know most Canadiens fans will really follow the game dramatically. I don't think you can go for a wrong pick. With Benson, from talking to scouts, there were a lot that were like, not sure he's top 10. A lot of skill there. Great players to play with it where he played in Winnipeg. So, which you can't take. You look at a guy like Ryan Leonard. He was the lowest scoring player on the top scoring U.S. national development team top line of all time. But, I still think that we're just looking at guys that there's so little variance in the top after the top 3, top 4 that it's like you could go so many ways, and I think you're going to be pretty happy with it. Although I still think the Montreal Canadiens made the wrong pick last year, but that's a story for a different day. But today we're going to talk instead, but the tip of the week, which we're going to stick with the draft, and it's don't be afraid to get aggressive in your fantasy draft with 2023 draft class rookies.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm going to be directly contradicting my tip from the previous episode, which was don't forget about previous draft classes. And the thing is, that is normally true, but every once in a while, a special year comes along with some talent that's just so high ceiling that I want you to throw that rule that I just gave you last week out the window. And the 2023 class applies. I just think the talent is so special, especially as you get closer to your actual fantasy draft date and you get a better sense of which players from this class are going to be in the draft. That's going to affect what you do too. But let's say we're in a world where, well, obviously Connor Bedard is going right to the NHL. We think that Adam Fantilli is. I think there's still a very good chance that Leo Carlsson does, and so on and so on. Maybe Will Smith as well. We'll see. But I think a lot of these players would have been the first overall pick last year. I think if you use Fantilli as an example, I think you could make a case that he would have gone first overall ahead of Owen Power in 2021. So just for people that don't follow the draft that closely and kind of wait until fantasy season before their draft to kind of catch up, if you're listening to this right now, you should know that these guys at the top of this draft class, they're, I think, quite far ahead, definitely from last year's class, maybe a little bit the year before as well. Like, I think Fantilli would have gone ahead of Matty Beniers as well. Nothing against Matty Beniers or Owen Power, but it's just I'm trying to offer some perspective on how good this class is. So I think it's totally fine to reach. We're in an era where even at 18 years old, players are expected to go right into the lineup and be top 6 forwards or top 4 defensemen as rookies. So that means there could be immediate fantasy impact. And I'm sure we'll keep talking about Connor Bedard, but to me, he's already a top 25 asset. I don't think I'd pick him any lower than that in fantasy. So go ahead and hype yourself up and reach on players from this draft class.
I will say, I just want to do some breaking news. It looks like Gabriel Landeskog will miss the entire 2023-24 season,
Wow.
with what is being reported as a cartilage transplant in his right knee.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So
So that
that's very
is.
good. So shout out to Colton for getting it for dailyfaceoff.com. Yeah, that is not a good sign. Yeah, but I would say Fantilli, like, because there's another guy that kind of came into the consciousness pretty early, and I think if I had to make a projection in 2019 when he was eligible, or there was rumors that he was going to go for the OHL exceptional draft, like exceptional status, like this guy probably could have been the best prospect, if you compare it to the 2020, 2021, 2022 prospects. Like, he's that good of a player. And every year you'll kind of hear sometimes like, oh, this guy could have probably gone first overall this year. I think with Fantilli, it's like, yeah, he definitely could have. It's no question about it. He'd be the top prospect for next year's draft too. There's no guy that's coming up that's as good as that. So yeah, so I think it's going to be. This is an interesting draft where you're going to get a lot of guys that are going to be getting 50 points in the NHL very soon, I think.
It's going to be very interesting. And speaking of very interesting, I'm going to transition to something that, you know what? I don't think this is interesting because we have to talk about the stupid World Championship, the worst tournament in hockey that's not best on best. It's just whoever's available. I call it the road hockey tournament because it's like knocking on your friends' parents' doors, asking if they can come play. And that's what the World Championship is. It doesn't determine anything. It's just whoever's available and not in the playoffs. But I digress. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, I will give you the respect, Stephen, for our best bet of the week. We are going to discuss World Championship futures. And I want to hear your pick for the winner. If you're into that kind of thing, I guess, tell me who's going to win this tournament.
Well, I will say well over 20 NHL franchises should be paying attention to this tournament. But I unfortunately do have to agree this year. This is not a great pool of players. Looking at Canada yesterday, and one of their big additions was an AHL player, and the other was like a seventh defenseman in the NHL. So it's so yeah, it's not going to be a great tournament, a great time in terms of really talented pool players, and we could have got some really quality players. We could have got Cale Makar. Actually, I think he's technically banned because of the 2018 team, but he could have got Nathan McKinnon, Jonathan Toews, Sidney Crosby, guys like that. It would have been pretty fun, but instead, whatever. But the team I'm looking for is the team I always look forward to when I don't think there's a true number one favorite, and that's Finland. And part of that is they play together. A large portion of this core play together in other tournaments throughout the year. A lot of this core remains the same year after year, and I think that makes that pretty good. So they don't need to rely on NHL talent. They played in 2018 a team of 0 NHL players and beat Canada. A team was only had NHL players on it. So when it comes to the way the Finns play, they just really will grind you down and make things really tough. And especially no Russia in the tournament, I think the talent pool for teams gives it more opportunity for a group like Finland to really thrive. And they were in the final in 2019, 2021, 2022. You're starting to see a trend that they typically get to the final, and they typically play against Canada too. So I think that's the group I'm be going for right now. Another, if you want to go for a long shot team, go for Switzerland. This is a team that doesn't change year to year often. They've had their ups and downs, and they don't typically score a lot, but I think, they got Nino Niederreiter this year. I think, if the Devils get knocked out, Nico Hischier typically likes to go to this event, so that could be interesting. And, the Devils in general have like half of Switzerland on them. So that would be pretty good. But, Finland's my favorite. Canada definitely is going to be contending for a medal there. But then, with Switzerland would be my underdog. Like, hey, if you want to take a long shot bet, that'd be a good one to do.
Okay, I like the pick. And anyone watching and listening, go to Proline Plus to get the futures. The odds will be updated daily. And a word from our sponsor, Proline Plus. Proline Plus is not just another sportsbook, being the only sportsbook that gives 100% of the profits back to Ontario. Proline has been your local trusted sportsbook for over 30 years, now offering Ontario sports fans more ways to play in-store, online, or take the game on the go with the Proline app. With your favorite sports and events right at your fingertips. Download the Proline app and bet in-app with Proline Plus today, or head over to prolineplus.ca to learn more. I wonder if I'm going to be able to memorize that one of these days. That would be pretty sweet. Okay, Stephen, now let's get to some listener questions. I think we have some good ones this week.
Yeah, so I like this first one. Comes from Adam Sandberger. Is Adam Fantilli really going to be a game-changing forward?
Yeah, and to me, it depends on how you define game changing. You know, you could say game changing is Connor McDavid and Connor Bedard, but if you mean game changing within the context of changing his team's fate, being able to take over a game, then yes, I think that Adam Fantilli has a superstar ceiling. And I actually see a real parallel to the 2015 draft class. So you have the generational talent, Connor McDavid, and the number 2 pick in that draft, Jack Eichel. The talk at the time was Eichel was also one of the best prospects to come around in a long time, and he could have been a number 1 overall pick in many other draft classes. There's a real similarity there. Jack Eichel was already playing Div 1 before getting drafted, just like Adam Fantilli. So I see a parallel, and even just in terms of a ceiling. I don't think Eichel has become a superstar, but he's been the star player in the NHL. He's been worthy of the number 2 overall pick. And I see something similar in terms of Fantilli's trajectory. In a fantasy context, I think he'll be a top 50 player within a few years of debuting in the NHL.
Yeah, no question for me. I just the way he can control a play, and we saw him in the NCAA, and some of those guys were going to pro immediately. Like he wasn't playing against low quality competition. When you go to the NCAA, you're playing against guys who are typically bigger, stronger, older, and can just do they're more suited for the pro game than playing against junior guys. And talking to Fantilli, he was telling me that he wanted to play there because he felt like he didn't have anything to really gain from playing like 4 or 5 years of junior hockey. He felt like he had a chance to really do something here at Michigan, and we saw this year him putting up over 60 points as a freshman. It was unbelievable. He deserved that Hobie Baker, no question. I think if he's in the NHL next year, I think he's going for 50 points. And Bedard's probably going to go out there and win the Calder Trophy, but I do think Fantilli is going to be like as good of a rookie as we've seen, regardless of what happens. Next question comes from Ranton and Raven. You could put 20 on 3 different players to win the Calder next season. Who are your 3? I think we just talked about 2 there.
Yeah. Okay. So Connor Bedard, of course, that's a shoe-in. You're overthinking it if you're not putting him on the ballot. And of course, Fantilli obviously deserves a lot of consideration. But I want to go back to my rule from a couple weeks ago about don't forget other draft classes. And I have a few other names that are really on my radar. Don't forget about defensemen. And I think Luke Hughes has a tremendous setup situation in New Jersey. Sort of like when we saw Cale Makar, he debuted in the playoffs as a rookie coming out of college, and then he won the Calder Trophy the next year because he just was entering a team that was already a major contender, had lots of talent around him. To me, it's like identical situation to what Luke Hughes is in. So to me, he's my number 2 pick for the Calder Trophy at the moment. And I'm tempted to say Logan Cooley, but we don't know 100%, unless I'm wrong, Stephen, but we don't know 100% that he's turning pro yet. Otherwise, I still like him as a Calder Trophy threat. If Logan Cooley doesn't turn pro, I'm going to say Brandt Clark of the Los Angeles Kings as my number 3 pick. So I'd say Bedard, Luke Hughes, Brandt Clark, and rounding out a hypothetical top 5 would be Fantilli and Logan Cooley.
Yeah, I believe the understanding here is Cooley is probably not going, and I believe he's going to be playing with Celebrini next year, so that would be quite the reason to not go. But I'd be wrong. Let's go there. But yeah, so it sounds like Cooley won't be going to the NHL. He'll go back to college, and I think that's the right call, no matter kind of who they draft. If I'm going, the 3, I have to go with Bedard. I do think Fantilli will be playing in the pros, and I really like the idea of Luke Hughes. I think that he's going to be playing decent minutes on a good team. But at the same time, Brandt Clark. The thing about it is part of the reason why Power, without getting all the points this year, why he got all of the love for the Calder was because he was just truly very good defensively, and I don't think we get that with Brandt Clark, and that's why I'm not going to put him there. I think he could receive some significant votes due to just the amount of points he'll probably put up, and he'll play a bigger role, I think, than Luke Hughes next year. But I think just Luke Hughes is just. I say that knowing that Hughes is also a liability defensively, but I think there's a lot going for him. I think he's a better prospect at this point. So I think those are the 3 guys I'd be putting in terms of top 5. I'm not willing to commit yet.
So. All right. Yeah, I agree.
Next question comes from Sam Clampson. Has Andrei Vasilevskiy's fantasy value dropped? He looked more human this year.
Yes, I do think it has dropped. In my own league scoring system, he finished as the number 8 goalie in the league this year. He's still an elite fantasy goalie, but when you're drafting him typically to be the safest pick on the board, slam dunk number 1 fantasy goalie, it would be considered a mild disappointment for him to drop to number 8. I do wonder if there's actually potential for him to be kind of like, I don't want to say buy low or sleeper, but I could see a bounce back next season because for the first time since 2019, the Tampa Bay Lightning have a short or a longer off season, I should say, which means a lot more time for recovery. And Vasilevsky's had a lot of mileage on playing 12 playoff series, 13 in 4 years, 12 in 3 years. And I could see him just being ready for a big workload and coming back a lot sharper next season because he finally has time to work on some stuff. But that said, even if it's true, I don't think he's in a tier of his own anymore as the safest goalie on the board. If you're looking at who's the number one fantasy goalie next year, it could still be him. It could be Connor Hellebuck on a new team. It could be Jake Ottinger. It could be Ilya Sorokin, Igor Shesterkin. So just the fact that there are so many names to rhyme off there, to me, it just implies that Vasilevskiy is no longer the king in his own tier. So yes, the answer is his fantasy value has gone down, but to me, that's actually a buying opportunity in pools next year.
It's an interesting way of looking at it. I do agree for sure from a fantasy perspective. I think in a real life perspective, this kind of like you alluded to, this might be actually what just saves Tampa and might put them right back into the final next year. This break, it's hard to do it year after year after year. I don't think anyone really expected them to do it 4 years in a row. But after three straight cup final appearances and two cups, they still got most of that same core. It's not like they forgot how to play. And yeah, they're a little older and I don't expect this the best hockey ever out of Hedman and Stamkos going forward, but I do expect some very good hockey. And I think this is a group that should bounce back next year and contend, but we'll have to see on that one. And then this one comes from Geraldine Harvey. Hey guys, so this might be a dumb question, no such thing, but I have to keep either Cale Makar or Leon Draisaitl. We give some extra points to blue liners to make an elite defender more like an elite forward, but Draisaitl is still Draisaitl. Both would be hard to replace. So what would you do? And I guess there's no. I try to clarify. I'm like, hey, like, how do you do the points thing? And they said it was a bit complicated, but basically, like, the best defenseman should get among the same amount of points as like a top forward.
Okay, yeah. So with that weighting, of course, it's going to be a hard decision because Cale Makar in that type of format might be a top 5 player. But that said, I still think what we're seeing from Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid in fantasy, it's sort of a landmark moment for pools in the last 25 years. So to me, I don't think you can overthink this one. And the best stat I can give you. So in the last 5 years, Leon Draisaitl has 81 points more than the third highest scorer in the league. So, in other words, McDavid is on another planet, but so is Draisaitl. He's in a like they're each in their own solar system, right? So, if Draisaitl is 81 points ahead of number 3, which is Nathan MacKinnon, it just gives you a perspective of how locked in he is as a top 2 player in fantasy. Like it's not even close. They're in their own stratosphere. So I still lean Draisaitl, even if the weighting is equal between him and Makar.
Okay, I like that. That's good. Yeah, it's like Draisaitl, it feels like we're still underrating him to a point. The way that it's talked about, it's like, oh, it's McDavid. It's like look at Draisaitl. Look what he could do, especially on the power play. It's like it's still Leon Draisaitl.
That's right. Yeah, especially that power play, the greatest power play in the history of the sport. So we're going to finish off with the starting lineup now. And Steven, you're getting the floor. And I already know there's going to be an all-time epically just jaw-dropping take coming here. But last week I ranked Star Wars movies. It's your turn. You're a big Spider-Man lover. So let's hear your ranking of Spider-Man movies in your starting lineup.
All right. So I'm going to start at the bottom. Amazing Spider-Man 1. I thought the suit was really cool. That's the first Andrew Garfield one. I had a hard time taking him seriously as Peter Parker. I liked Garfield as Spider-Man. I thought that he was very good, funny. The CGI was quite a lot, but I thought they did a great job. Speaking of CGI, but the reason why I didn't put it there is because I just didn't feel like I could truly believe Garfield, especially after seeing the previous 3 movies. So I had seen like kind of a blueprint of like, all right, so he's got to be better than this, and I don't think he was, and that's kind of why I think it's the bottom. The second worst, I'd say, is Amazing Spider-Man 2. I really enjoyed it the first time I watched it, but the more I've watched it back, I'm like, man, this is like, I don't know how to other than like Transformers in terms of the amount of CGI that was, and most of the Spider-Man movies have become that, but at that one, it was just like I can't believe they threw the Green Goblin in there. Like that, what in the world was that supposed to be? That was such a waste. Now it does seem like we might get something with that Rhino that was shown at the very end, but the fact that we got Rhino, it's like, oh, that's so cool. He's like more epic than I was expecting. And then they just like, oh yeah, by the way, series is canceled. It's like, oh, okay, maybe not. So that's how I view that one. Next one, Homecoming. Good movie, but it felt a little too safe and too much reliance on Iron Man. It still feels like we haven't seen a proper like Tom Holland Spider-Man movie where Tom Holland Spider-Man is actually like the main character.
Mhm.
Um, it's like every movie he's overshadowed by something else, and so it'd be nice to kind of see what they could do. But it was a nice starting point, but it didn't feel like it could. It felt like they could have done so much more with it. Then it's Spider-Man 1, and I still enjoy watching it, but just looking back, I tried not to go through nostalgia glasses because I thought that one's still a very enjoyable one, and the scene with Green Goblin and Spider-Man in the burning building, I think is still one of the coolest Spider-Man scenes. But you watch it now, and it's like, oh yeah, this movie is like very poorly done and compared to everything else. Like I make fun of the CGI of the current movies, but it feels a bit more believable, especially the one scene where Spider-Man's holding Mary Jane after saving her from the Green Goblin's bombs and stuff. And it's like you could tell it's like completely like an animatronic, and he
Mhm.
doesn't move whatsoever. And she's like, "Wow!" And he's like completely robotic, and it's like that kind of killed it for me. The next one being is Far From Home. I thought that was really cool. I wish we saw. We kind of start seeing just the kind of the nut CGI stuff, and it was just like, this doesn't feel great. And I do like the way that the twist of Mysterio though, because I thought Mysterio was always a super cool character, and I
Mhm.
wasn't sure how they were going to do it, but I thought they did a good job there. No real complaints other than a little bit too much CGI. But the one where he's going for the hallucinations, I think, is one of the coolest scenes I've ever seen in a movie. That was
Yeah,
really
very
cool.
true to the Mysterio sequences in the comic book.
Very much so. Then the next one being Spider-Man 2, the original one. I know everyone kind of says that's their favorite movie, and I thought it was pretty good. It's just I don't know. It just that one's the one that just kind of doesn't stand out to me as being like the one I really want to go back and watch. And I don't know why. It's like there's no real flaws with it. There's a lot of really good concepts, and it kind of sets up the Peter versus Harry drama. But I don't know. It just doesn't sit with me the same. Into the Spider Verse is my number 3 movie. I know that's a lot of people's number 1 too, but the reason why, just for me, someone who suffers a lot of headaches, that's a hard movie to watch. A lot of times, just the animation style. Um, I've loved it every time I've watched it. I'm really excited for this next one. I love the Spider Verse stuff. My first favorite the thing that got me into Spider-Man was the Spider-Man cartoon from the mid 1990s, and one
Mhm.
of the final episodes they did was a Spider-Verse idea, and I thought that was really cool. They were able to make that into something. My number 2 movie, considering I haven't said it yet, is Spider-Man 3. And I know that's like everyone's like bottom, but I was
Spider-Man
just
3. Wow.
from that series, it felt like the most polished production wise. Watching it back, I still feel like the quality of it actually still holds up. Um, I was very happy to see Venom. It felt like it was almost like, even though the actual physical version of Venom in the Venom movies spinoff is way better, I think this portrayal of Venom, of this guy being a pretty bloodthirsty guy, was actually pretty cool. And I don't know if you've seen, but there's like cut scenes from it, and there's a lot of cut content from that movie in particular that's really interesting, including like a much bigger Venom, but also one where Eddie Brock basically turns into a skeleton near the end, and it's really cool. But for me, I think the thing that really drives that movie home is Sandman. I think that is one of the greatest Spider-Man characters ever, and I felt like he never got his own thing, but I thought he was great. The story was good with like why he would be like he wasn't out there to just cause harm. He was trying to help out his family. I thought that was cool, and it'd be great to
Mhm.
see if they can do more of that. Now that there's been rumors that he could be in another Spider-Man movie, and then Spider-Man No Way Home has to be number 1. It's just that's just everything I wanted. That's all I was asking for. I don't care if the story was stupid. I got to see all the Spider-Man together. I always wanted that, and I hope that I feel like that the success of that could be like, well, we could keep trying different things. Maybe we do something where, if we do a real Into the Spider-Verse thing, it could be like, like we could see more of these guys involved again. So um, that's just my hope. But otherwise, I think that this, I don't have I could watch all the Spider-Man movies. I love them all for their own reasons. It's the only movie series I truly care to always watch. But I'm going with No Way Home is my number one.
Okay. I still don't know. No Way Home, I still think there's somewhat of a recency bias, but it is the chemistry of the three Spider-Men together was really fun. And I do think, just from a marketing standpoint, there's going to be calls to bring them back. And now that they've opened up the possibility of multiverses, they can do it whenever they want. If they just feel like bringing Andrew Garfield back into the mix or Tobey Maguire, it can actually be feasible, which is very interesting to me. I like most of the justifications for your rankings there, Steven. Still think Spider-Man 3 is a bit of a disaster because Topher Grace, in physicality, he doesn't look like Eddie Brock. Eddie Brock's supposed to look like Brock Lesnar. He's supposed to be a bodybuilder. But I still respect the bold choice. And of course, it does have one of the most famous sequences, which is emo black costume Peter strutting down the street. So I'll give you that one as well.
Oh, and the suit was great. The black suit I thought was awesome. That was exactly what I was hoping for being a movie.
I think you're bang on with that one for sure. Well, that's it for this episode of Puck Poolies. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back. I think the next episode we're going to be doing some fantasy hockey season end awards, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll see you soon.